vice presidential debate by asking, who am I and why am I here? In all seriousness, I want to begin today with a story about how it was that I, James Wynn, Kelly Smith, CMU, and Center for Arts and Society came to host the social conference this year. So I've got 5 parts to my presentation. Who am I? Why am I here? Planetary hospitality, the concept of backstory in the late theory of culture, how woman on the moon shaped actual space travel, and then a thrilling conclusion. Okay, there's our vice presidential candidate. Many of you have probably never even heard of Ross Perot, let alone okay, 3 years ago, this image appeared on a poster in the hallways with an invitation to submit projects for the CMU Center for Arts and Society. Their 3-year initiative on the theme of hospitality. I had helped to create the center in the early 2000s, but I never submitted a project to the center to be funded. This poster and the text that accompanied it made it clear that the concept of hospitality would not be assumed to be wholly positive, since the figure is looking apprehensively upon a gift that had been placed in the doorstop. For some reason, the first thing that popped into my mind was planetary hospitality, and our human-centered way of seeing the entire universe as a place filled with desirable or not so desirable neighborhoods. The 10 worst places to live in the universe, or a world going to hell, here are the solar system's 5 most livable places. These headlines represent a very common trope in science reporting, and they also reinforce Kate's argument from yesterday that Americans can see living off Earth only as sort of an extension of 1950s suburbia. I began to play around with the notion of planetary hospitality after seeing this poster, and doing so, I stumbled across numerous real-world initiatives that are trying to get people to experience literal off-Earth hospitality by pre-booking rooms in low-orbit hotels that don't exist yet, or flying on Blue Origin's New Shepard, or in virtual outer space, such as these plans for a lunar-shaped hotel, I think to be built in Dubai and Vegas, that will supposedly feature expeditions to this AirSat's surface of the moon. Looking for something more meaningful and a collaboration partner, I found out that my longtime friend and English department colleague, James Wynn, was in the end stage of a book on the rhetoric of astrocolonialism, in which he compares the rhetoric of 15th and 16th century British and Spanish colonists to the rhetoric we use today to talk about exploring off-Earth. We pitched a 3-year project on planetary hospitality to the center, and our proposal was accepted. James and I organized 2 movie screenings paired with science talks during the 2023-2024 academic year. The turnout to these events was okay, but very few of our humanities colleagues attended, and the turnout for the films themselves, we showed Elysium and The Martian, was very low, which mattered in part because the cost to exhibit them was about $1,000 per film. James and I went back to the drawing board and to figure out what we could do that might attract more humanists to our 2 central questions about planetary hospitality. Number 1, in what ways is living on planet Earth, or is planet Earth becoming less hospitable, and what are the habitability challenges of living off Earth? So in the spring of 2024, we reorganized our single project into 3 sub-projects, and the first was a class which we taught the following fall called Hospitable Worlds. We introduced the students to ancient Greek notions of hospitality linked to the idea of oikos, meaning home, family, and home economics, and what was considered the proper behavior for hosting guests. We also read a little bit about Derrida and the concept of hospitality. He has a whole book on it. As some of you may know, Derrida grew up French and Jewish in Algeria, a place he never felt fully at home. We also did some readings on climate change, astrofuturism. We read The Wiener-Smith City on Mars, which I highly recommend. Can we settle space? Should we settle space? And have we really thought it through? We read N.K. Jemison's Emergency Skin. We watched Sun Ra Space's The Place, Don't Look Up, and we listened to Whitey on the Moon by Gil Scott-Heron. The students responded to the readings as they would in a typical class, but we also asked them to create mini art projects every week for the first 7 weeks of the class. We then asked them to take one or more of their mini projects and develop them into something more robust for a final project. And I have some samples. This was a brochure on Greek hospitality, the rules for how to do it. This was, is Ilya still here? He was at the earlier panel this morning. He created this wonderful sort of mythical world and created a language. These are people going to visit people they in a new land. Okay, so the larger projects, we were able to give access to the students to a $100 budget per person for their final projects. These two architecture students devised an expandable tent for exploring the moon. Sophia created this future art exhibit, how Thanksgiving might be remembered by a future alien race. A beautiful graphic novel about the discovery of a long-lost biosphere. This is about a spaceship that gets kind of lost in the universe and is found later by some astronauts. So really amazing class. Czar was one of our wonderful students. We loved teaching it. We loved having these conversations. It was 2 instructors and 10 students. So probably one of the most highly resourced, magical teaching experiences of my life. The second part of our project became collaborating with SOCIA. In the spring of 2024, James had stumbled across SOCIA, and as we read more about your organization, it occurred to us that you might be the droids we were looking for. So we used some of our project funding to send James to SOCIA in Kiruna, which is co-sponsored by the European Astrobiology Institute. Since we were co-teaching a class, I stayed behind to teach. And at the Kiruna conference, James pitched the idea of bringing your conference to CMU, knowing that we could use some of our project funding to subsidize the event. The third aspect of our project is called Sci-Fi Book Club. Since February of 2025, we have hosted or co-sponsored 3 sci-fi book clubs, and the formula has worked like this. We choose a book, sometimes with input from our students and our colleagues. We then used our project funding to buy 50 copies of the book. We created posters and a sign-up with a deadline. For our first book club, where we're reading Parable of the Sower, 63 people signed up in the first 24 hours. We invited speakers. We distributed the books over the holiday, the winter holiday, and then we came back in February. We had 2 speakers give very short 5-minute presentations on the book, and then it was in that room where we've had lunch. We had about 8 people per table. We had about 60 people turn up, and then we had a discussion of the book in small groups. This part of our project has been so successful that we've joined with our colleagues in the Department of Languages, Cultures, and Applied Linguistics. It's called LCAL. And between English and LCAL, we hope to keep Sci-Fi Book Club going as an annual event. I've described our work in detail in part to explain to you and also to myself what I'm doing here, but I hope some of these ideas might be portable, inspiring, or useful to this group. I loved Sherry Wells Jensen's exhortation from yesterday. Choose to move whatever lever your hand is already holding onto. And I think Sci-Fi Book Club especially could work anywhere. It could be scaled down, made more affordable. We feel like we sort of reverse engineered college when one of the students said, it felt really good to read a whole book. So I also wanted to give you this backstory because until James and I began working on this project, I was not really, I have some pictures. This was a event, so many happy smiling faces, and we also During yesterday's frequent mentions of capitalism, however, I was reminded of one of the reasons I've enjoyed this project so much. As a Marxist-trained cultural theorist, historian, and media critic, I came for the planetary hospitality, but I stayed for the capitalism critique. So my interest in Marx's critique of capitalism go back to graduate school, but in 2017-2018, I organized the largest commemoration of Karl Marx in North America. Under the banner of Marx at 200, I helped to conceive of and organize more than 20 events, including an art exhibit in a gallery downtown called Marx at 200, a spin-off of this show Travel to Brooklyn, and we had more than 6,000 people attend these events over 18 months. I think Andrew Carnegie is definitely turning in his grave. This was one of the pieces of giant Marx beard built out of steel wool by a Ukrainian-born artist. So for the last 3 years, I've been finishing a book on mid-20th century American films about unionized workers. It's called Backstory, Labor, Film, and Television in the Age of the Blackness. If you want to know more about this book, I'd love to talk about it, so please ask me about it during one of the breaks. But what I've been working on, what I've been figuring out as I've been finishing this book, is a method of cultural analysis known as the labor theory of culture. And I first came across this idea in the early 2000s, an essay by Michael Denning, who had been my graduate school advisor at Yale American Studies. His essay, The Socioanalysis of Culture, Rethinking the Cultural Turn, Denning called for a labor theory of culture to replace, or at very least supplant, the approaches that were dominant at the time, including the commodity theory of culture, like how do we read it, how do we interpret it, what do audiences do with it, or the ideology theory of culture, which sort of sees culture as a conspiracy theory by the capitalists to keep us scrolling on our phones or otherwise entertainingly enslaved. So the problem with these two approaches to culture, Denning argued, is that they position the concept of work and culture or work and leisure as fundamentally at odds. These approaches imagine work as something we do when we're at work, and culture, synonymous here with leisure, as something we do when we're not at work. But what would happen, he asked, if we think about culture and work as being more like a dyad or more like synonyms? Denning was inspired to develop this concept from the work of Harry Braverman. This is his Labor, Monopoly, Capital. And so he argued culture is the product and result of labor, a part of the same process. And that's Denning. This is from Braverman. The fundamental aspect of human labor is that the unity of conception and execution can be broken in time, space, or motive force. It is this that produces human culture. So, and what it's being opposed to here is non-human culture. This is a quote from Marx. What distinguishes the worst architect from the best of these is that the architect raises his structure in imagination before he erects it in reality. So the idea that certain species are kind of programmed to build nests, webs, hives, and I chose this for the worst architect. But we generally, maybe not this particular architect, erect our ideas in our imagination before we complete them. And I think this is an especially good way to think about sci-fi. How do we imagine what we might do before we do it? So how does this apply to literature, fine arts, television, film, and music? As Denning explained, because conception can be communicated from one place and one time to another via writing and the means of mechanical and electronic reproduction, conception can be registered, saved, and stored for later. It can be saved in a variety of forms, so something that's conceived in one time or place can be executed in another. And Denning called this sort of the kind of the beauty, but also the tragedy of the arts. So I have sort of distilled the labor theory of culture into 7 steps, 7 research steps. And if you're in a cultural studies adjacent discipline, this might not seem super unique, but this is sort of all done not instead of interpretation, but to really bolster and buttress interpretation. So thinking about the backstory of the inspiration source for a particular film, thinking of the backstory of how the film was funded, scripted, and produced, the backstory of the social, cultural, economic background of the top-line creators. And here I tend to try to look at much more than just the director. The backstory of the social, cultural, economic background of the actors, the backstory of the shooting location, the backstory of the marketing, distribution, and reception of the film, and then thinking about the film's legacy. So in my last few minutes, I want to I think of this as sort of my meat grinder, so I want to run Woman in the Moon, Frau im Mond, through this process to see what comes out. How many people here have seen Woman on the Moon? Okay, not that many. It is wild. I highly recommend it. It is so weird. It is considered the first hard science fiction film ever made. It got a surprising number of things right about the physics of space travel. It was directed by Fritz Lang, adapted from a novel written by his wife, Thea von Harbou. Fritz Lang is best known for Metropolis, and I got introduced to Fritz Lang. It's one of those movies in the book I'm finishing, Clash by Night, is also directed by him. Lang brought in scientific advisors, including the mathematician Hermann Orbith, who had written a book on spaceflight that had influenced the novel that inspired the movie. So there's a lot of connections here. With the financial backing of Lang and his film company, UFA, Orbith announced an ambitious scheme to launch an actual rocket for the film's premiere. Orbith assembled a team, but their plans proved a failure because they had no experience engineering rocketry. Nevertheless, Thea von Harbou incorporated a lot of what she had learned from Orbith, including the need for a rocket to achieve orbital escape velocity. Show this moment in the film. Really fascinating here to see an incredibly prominent woman scientist in the aerospace industry in 1929. So the plot is a scientist writes a paper theorizing that there's gold on the moon. All the other scientists laugh at him. This is like your worst nightmare when you're giving a paper, right? He becomes the laughingstock of the scientific community, and the humiliation drives him slightly mad. An evil capitalist cabal has their representative, whose hair is styled to look like Hitler's, force the professor and several of his scientists to attempt a mission to the moon. They want the gold for themselves. They don't want it to fall in the hands of visionaries and idealists. That would be me. The professor, the Hitler hair dude, and the 3 scientists, 2 men and the woman they are both in love with, successfully blast off the moon. This kid stows away, and one of them is left on the moon, and then the woman decides to stay with them, hence the film's title. But then Hermann Orbith, Werner von Braun, and Willy Ley all advise the film, and then all go on to work for NASA. The other really important thing about this conclusion is that in the rocket industry, to this point, people counted up, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Lang said, why don't we count backwards? So Fritz Lang invented the reverse countdown that we have today. So I don't have time for my thrilling conclusion, but I will just throw this out. We can talk more about it in Q&A. The final idea I've been working on is that not only are space travel and film technologically and dialectically intertwined, but they share a common material and physical substrate, which is nitrocellulose. And so I'm really thinking that film and space exploration are these kind of conjoined intertwined enterprises. So that is me using the labor theory of culture to think about film